So again, life before we were conquered. The Garifuna people have specific birth rituals, including placing a soft piece of burlap or something like a plywood to shape the child's head. That was one of the things that we did to mold our head. They would put the plywood there, tie it around, and this was for both the men and the female children. They would do that. That was an indigenous practice that we did. And they would also require to massage the girl's nose. And they did that because they wanted the girls to have a nose like their indigenous mothers. But for the boys, they didn't massage their nose because they wanted them to have that strong feature from their African fathers. Okay. And also they did the feet binding, but only for the girls, because they wanted the girls to have the narrow feet like their indigenous mother. But for the boys, they didn't do that. They wanted them to have their broad feet like their indigenous African fathers. So we never hid who we were or where we came from. We represented both sides, and we were proud of the different features that we got from both sides. So again, one of the things that we did was making sure that the nose was one of the things. It was in my village, not all villages did this, but in my village, my mom's village in St. Vincent, Belize, it was important for the girl's nose to get massaged. If your nose weren't massaged, trust me, you will hear it from the villagers. Oh goodness, fata tigre, muto, tigre mesu, meaning her nose is as flat as a cat. You know, and they would tell, oh, susu. You know, you know, like who is that person with a flat nose? Because it was important. That means you weren't keeping up your tradition. And they would tell the mother was Magoli, that the mother was too lazy to massage the child's nose. You know, and again, not all villages practice that, but in certain villages in Guatemala and Honduras, they maintained that tradition. In other villages, they lost that. They assimilated, you know, to where they were at, so they didn't continue a lot of the traditions. Again, before the occupation, the Garifuna people had their own spiritual beliefs and practices. They had the true freedom of religion to worship their ancestors and deities, including the practice of burying the bones of their fallen heroes around their huts. Now, with that being said, we used to bury our people. We didn't take them to a cemetery. We didn't have any such things as cemeteries. We buried them within our huts, sometimes in our huts or around our huts. So when the Europeans came and they started digging around our huts, what did you think they assumed? Cannibalism. That was the first thing that they saw that we would hang the femurs of our fallen warriors because we you know, really we appreciated them. It was for protection. It was for, we knew what they were for. They didn't know what they were for, and they never asked. So all they did was just jump to conclusion and say, hey, these are cannibals. And that's the story that they continue to spread throughout. And it's so embedded in the society that even that movie, The Pirates of the Caribbean, when they talked about, oh, well, you know, these Carib people, they were talking about us. And you saw when the Caribs were there waiting for Johnny Depp to get roasted and did the, you know, that's the insult that's still about us. That's what they believe. And during that time when that movie came out, we had to sit there and write Disney to tell them that they were being offensive. And what we got from them was like, those are fictional characters. And we're like, we're not fictional, we're here. So what we did was we went to Disneyland and we protested them to let them know that we are here, you know. But again, because they didn't know about us and they thought that we were fictional, because when going back to, they wrote us out of history, you know, but we knew we were here. So we fought to make sure that they respected our identity and not to label us as cannibals. So again, even today, the Garifuna people maintain their traditional spirituality and rituals, including symbolically feeding of the ancestors, honoring them with communal gathering of the family and friends. There is also a ritual symbolically feeding our ancestors and providing new clothes to them. And we do this at different times, like my mom just passed away in August last year. So what I'll do on her 1-year anniversary, I'm gonna put some food for them, because in our Garifuna belief, it takes them 1-year journey to get to what we call Sere. That's our heaven. You know, so it takes them 1 year to travel. And between that time, during 6 months, we put food for them to replenish their souls and everything like that to help them through their journey. And during the last year, I mean the whole year, we laid food, we put clothes, we do a symbolic bath for them, and we give them that offering so they're rested and clean in their final resting place. So here we get to the invasion, occupation. So the Europeans began to arrive to Europe and around the island in 1498. The British planters, colonizers, occupiers, followed by the French, later established settlements in Europe and started to displace the Kaliniku. The planters claimed that the occupied territories and surveyed the land only to allocate more of the fertile lands to themselves. Mind you, we didn't agree with this. They just came and started taking whatever they wanted. We tried to live in peace with them, but we signed many, many treaties with them. Many treaties were signed, and of course, they violated every treaty that they signed. Sounds familiar? Okay. All right. Okay. The increased presence of the Europeans and their illegal land grabbing would lead to 150 years of fighting. We fought them for 150 years for our land. But what happens when indigenous people fight for their land? What are they labeled? Aggressors, savages, terrorists. Again, history repeating itself. We hear these terms being used today. Mm-hmm. You pick up and you're fighting for your land, you're this, you're a savage, you're whatever. Just to justify them taking your land from you, okay? So it's nothing new, it's something that's been happening throughout history. It continues to happen now in this day and present age. Again, the increased presence of the Europeans and their illegal land grabbing would lead to 150 years of battle and 2 major wars with Kaliniku. In Christopher Taylor's book, The Black Caribs, unbeknownst to the Caribs of St. Vincent, their lands have been granted to the King of England, King Charles II. Well, we know about King Charles. King Charles II of England to the Earl of Carlisle in 1627. So what they did was they signed a treaty with us saying, this is your land, we're gonna leave you alone. So we're like, okay, we can live here in peace. But what were they doing in England? They were selling off all parcels of the land. And what we didn't know is, hey, if we lived on that land, they were selling us too. How can you sell us? That's like somebody going knocking at your door and say, hey, I'm moving in here and all of your furniture and everything, including your kids and your wife, belongs to me. Oh, I think a lot of us are going to be like, what you talking about, Willis? You know, we're not going for that. And so that's what happened with us. And they were surprised that we actually said no. They were surprised that our chiefs actually said, we don't recognize the King of England. They were surprised that we actually took up arms to fight for our homeland. What did they expect? We weren't just going to give them the hands to our country that we've lived on there for 7,000 years. No, we weren't going to do that. So we fought them for 150 years. Again, the British, continued to get irritated. The many treaties, but the most important treaty was the peace treaty that we signed on March 31st, 1660. And that is the Treaty of the Basse Terre between the 15 Carib captains and the French English, which recognized the Carib rights to Dominica and St. Vincent. None of those English colonies were supposed to sit there and occupy those territories. It was written, it was agreed upon that they would leave us alone. By this time, they had already occupied all these other, countries around them, islands around them. But those 2 territories were like neutral. We're going to leave them alone. We're going to live in peace. But what happened? They violated that. So when they violated that, this led to the First Carib War. We fought them. We fought them. We defeated them. It was neutral. Yeah, you don't hear about that. They had to retreat. And they had to agree to come to a compromise with us. Mm-hmm. So we compromised with them. And in the compromise, next slide, all of this in orange, Carib territory, our territory, all of that. This part was theirs, all of that was ours. But what happened? Inch by inch, they kept moving until they eventually got to Kingston. But we never ceded that land. That was the original treaty for this land that we agreed upon that was going to be our territory and we were going to live in peace was signed on March 31st So we're sitting up there talking about this is all of our territory, this is going on over there. And the treaty is signed and dated, the treaty which marks this territory that's ours, but they took it from us. This is the evidence. The one thing that we have on our side, because right now what they're trying to do is make us fight for, other things that don't belong to us, but this is our indigenous land rights. And to this day, they're trying to keep that claim from us throughout. Not just with the Garifuna people, but with the Taínos, with the Caribs, with everybody. They act like they don't have the evidence that they drew up, because they drew this map. We didn't. The first Carib War from 1772 to 1773, we fought them again because of this, because they violated that. The second Carib War was from 1795 to 1797. By the 1700s, the British had become increasingly irritated fighting with the Kalinagu. The many treaties signed were violated by the British, including the peace treaty of March 31st, 1660, at the Chateau Base Terre, between 15 Caribs again. They violated that. They started selling off our land. According to the archives, the British intentionally went from calling the Caribs to St. Vincent. Remember, during that time, we were all Caribs. There was no distinction between black Caribs, yellow Caribs, or whatever. But during this time, on May 10th, because again, they document everything. They went to a meeting, the Council of Meetings, this was on May 10th, 1767. They went to sign the militia bill against the Caribs. So what that meant was they started to identify us as Africans, as blacks, as escaped slaves. Because once they labeled you as an escaped slave, you have no indigenous land rights. Once they identified you as black, you have no indigenous land rights there, because you're indigenous to where? The African continent. Because if you look throughout all of their recorded, because they archived and they recorded everything, this did not happen until May 10th, 1769, to justify, number one, getting our land, number two, getting rid of us by any means necessary. So that's what happened. We went from being Caribs to being slaves. And that's where they started to reinvent this whole narrative that how did the Garifuna people get here? Even though they knew we were already there, shipwreck. A shipwreck happened. What shipwreck? And if you look and you read, oh, it was a Spanish shipwreck. No, it was a Dutch shipwreck. No, it was whatever. But the thing is, slaves were commodity. And one thing that the English did very well was they documented every single person that they captured and where they captured them from and where they dropped them off at. So if there was a slave ship that crashed, they had insurance on that ship. Because again, we were a commodity. So if a ship was lost or sunk, they made claims. So we were able to, of course, go through the archives. There's no evidence of any shipwreck in or around that area during that time. The only shipwreck that they could account for during that time happened in 1685, and that was around Barbados. It was nowhere near St. Vincent. But again, to justify, because those other islands, they had already occupied. They were already, but to justify keeping our land from us, this is who you are. All of a sudden, they changed the narrative of who we are.